listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos, and we wish our guy, Michael Lombardi, a happy belated birthday here on the GM Shuffle.
Thank you, Femi.
Michael, how's it going? I know birthdays are always a time for reflection as you make another trip around the sun. How was it for you yesterday evening?
Yeah. It was great. I mean, I had the great Bill Berman, who was so kind. He went out and made the dinner and handled everything in the backyard, in his backyard, which is really at my house, but it's his backyard because it was his idea.
Yep.
But it was wonderful. I got to spend time with the family. My boys aren't back, but it was good. And so it's the kickoff of summer, which we're going to spend a lot of time in that backyard. We bought a karaoke machine, which is going to be dangerous, Femi, I could tell you that. This is not going to go well. I mean, this is going to I got a feeling police are going to be showing up at the house. I just have that feeling.
Maybe a police rendition as well.
He's already been Sinatra. Last night he was Peter Cetera. I'm trying to think who else. Oh, he's definitely going to be Kenny Loggins. So, I mean, there's just the range of what he's going to come up with. And then you get Mick back into it and Matthew. So it's going to be pretty good. We'll get Corey down from North Jersey, who is the ultimate Texer. And obviously, I'm sure he's probably a good karaoke man himself. So, and we have two mics, which is going to be interesting. We could have two duets. I mean, we could have the Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Islands in the Stream there, and we can do all that. So it'll be fun. It'll be great. It was a great gift. Thank you, Mick. We appreciate it. The backyard's very happy about it.
I mean, a karaoke machine, the drinks start flowing, people start getting a little too confident. You mentioned all these people. What are you singing? I mean, that's what people want to know. Like you got to hop on there. You're not going to just be spectating.
I doubt if I'll get the mic very often, but if I get it, it's going to be Racing in the Street or Something in the Night. It'll be some. So anyway, this is ironic and hilarious, but my backyard in Ocean City is, there's not a lot of backyards because the houses are, because of the beach and all. We have a pretty good sized backyard, which is kind of nice. But and the neighborhoods are kind of close. So when I come back from the beach, which lugging all the shit down when you have the kids, you bring back and you got to wash the chairs, you got to clean all their toys because, they're not doing any of that, right? No. So they're going to go right into the house and they're going to go do their thing, sit there. Their grandmother's going to make them snacks. They're going to sit on the couch in the air conditioner and watch their shows. Meanwhile, we're all outside, cleaning up. And usually what I do is I take the TV and I turn it on and then I'll put like a Springsteen concert on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I'll crank it up, figuring that, I can't imagine anybody could hear it, because I'm deaf in one ear, so my hearing range isn't very elaborate, right? So anyway, so I'll turn it on, and I may go back to 13, I may go back to 2000. I don't know. I'll find them on YouTube. They're great, right? I got them all, and they go in there, and I'm playing air guitar. Sometimes I play the piano while I'm cleaning up. It depends on what happens. And so, the lady across the street, she's like, I want to say she's a good pitch and wedge away from me. So she shows up one night. We're sitting out by the fire. It was in the fall. And she comes over, and we have the music going naturally. And she's like, oh, yeah, I hear Springsteen every day. I said, excuse me? She said, oh, yeah. Thank God I like Springsteen. Because if I didn't, I think I'd be throwing rocks at your house. I'm like, oh, shit. I didn't realize it was that loud. I didn't.
You're jamming. You're going to get a noise ordinance
usually
or
at
something.
The house. Yeah, usually at the house I go, oh, no, are you playing that again? How many times can you possibly listen to that? And I said, probably one more and I'll keep going, And
100%.
But it was great. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah,
100%.
That's what it's all about, right? I mean, you sit in the backyard, it's family, it's communion,
Yep.
it's the most dangerous job, I will say, forget the cooking. I mean, the cooking, Millie handles that and I do the grill. But the most dangerous job is the iPad, is the playlist. So I'll tell you this story. So we had a surprise visitor on Saturday. Mr. Coach Bill took his boat from Annapolis up to where he's going to go for the summer, and he stopped by and he's like, hey, I'm going to stop by Ocean City. We got some time. Yeah, sure. Come on over. So he comes over and, we throw a couple of those steaks on the grill. We're sitting in the backyard. Of course, I get to introduce the great BB with the other great BB. Bill Berman meets Bill Belichick. And so we're sitting there and the night's going and we're all hanging out, having beer, talking football, all that stuff. And the line of the summer comes. And this is one that's going to get paraded around forever. So Bill looks at me and says, Michael, is that your playlist? I said, oh, no, I don't do the music out back here. I got taken that away. Berman handles all the music in the backyard until the boys get here. And Belichick looks at Berman and says, man, that's a great playlist. And so that's all he needed. That's all he needed. That's like Secretariat getting the whip around the corner at Belmont. I mean, that was just going to take off, right?
You got the vote of confidence.
No one's going to challenge him now. No one is going to challenge him now. It was awesome.
That's a great story.
Matty will come in with something. Corey will try to disrupt it, but it was great. It was awesome. He's going to come back for they got the big game here this summer. The Ocean City, because of our field, which is right on the beach. Bergen Catholic is going to play, as they mentioned on the Pat McAfee show, Bergen Catholic is going to play IMG Academy right there in August. He's going to come back to that game, so we'll get to see him again.
There you go. Put some more red meat on the grill, get some tunes rolling in. Hey, if you get the Bill Belichick endorsement on the playlist, you ain't being able. You're not telling Bill Berman nothing. You ain't going to be able to tell him nothing the rest of the way.
He renamed the playlist the GOAT playlist. I mean, and he should. He should. He got complete now. Nobody's believing it. I was there to verify. Anissa was there, too, his wife. She was there to verify. So was Abby, his daughter. They were all there to verify. Like, no one can deny it.
I mean, that's a story that Berman's going to be telling for the rest of his life. That's great stuff there.
Forever.
We absolutely love it. It's a great story to kick things off here on the GM Shuffle. Obviously, a little bit of a slower time in the football world, but we're here nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I think from a more timely standpoint, obviously we are football junkies, but we are fans of just sports and competition in general. Recently, earlier this week, the Boston Celtics hung banner number 18, beating the Dallas Mavericks in a series 4-1. Their Boston winning that championship. And you wrote about this on the Daily Coach, about Brad Stevens, who went from coaching the Celtics to the front office role as the president of basketball operations, and kind of talked about how they brought this team together and the decisions and maybe the decisions that they had throughout the years with Danny Ainge or Brad Stevens to kind of ultimately reach the pinnacle here as they did Monday night.
I thought it was really interesting when he was sitting on the set of the NBA TV show, and they asked him after they won their 18th title, which is painful for me to watch, be honest with you. I mean, we're so far behind them. I mean, the great Uncle Junior line applies to the 76ers and the Celtics. The Sixers are so far behind in the race, they actually think they're in the lead because they have no chance. They have no clue. And when you listen to Brad talk, you realize how far off they really are, really, because what he said was so relevant. And what we tried to write about today in the Daily Coach was about the characteristics that which he believes is monumental towards success as a team. And I think it happens to have a lot of credibility. So let's just go over. So, he gets in the job. He's never been a GM before in basketball, but he's built the teams at Butler. So he understands constructions of the team. And it's fascinating how teams, and this is the perfect time of the year to do it, because summertime for most guys that are sitting on the beach in the NFL, you can read books about other games, other teams, how they're built. So this one book by Andy Martino, it's called The Yankee Way. And in the book, he talks about how the Yankees devised a blueprint, if you will, under Gene Michaels, a manifesto, and under what they wanted for every single position. And they stole it from Red Auerbach, basically. If you look at the Celtics when Red Auerbach was great, the point guard did these three things. The second guard did this. The center was always lean, tall, wasn't a bulky man, could run, right? Mm-hmm. The sixth man was the most important player. And so that evolution is what the Yankees used. And I think what Brad understood is that evolution. And so, he trades for Kemba Walker for Al Horford. He doesn't trade Jaylen Brown in 21. He makes a great trade for Derek White, trades Langford for Derek White. He traded Marcus Smart and for Porzingis and he gets 2 first-round picks back, okay? And he re-signs Jaylen Brown. He trades Brogdon and Williams for Holiday. He re-signs Porzingis and Holiday, and he keeps Mazzulla on the staff and brings in Jeff Van Gundy. Like every move he made was perfect towards leadership. But what the thing he said at that press conference, Femi, that I thought was the best thing was, we are looking for self-aware players. And we wrote about George Costanza. You know the scene in the Boyfriend episode. I think it was episode 3, season 3, where Keith Hernandez is in the locker room and Kramer and Jerry and George are talking about the basketball they game, and Seinfeld says to George, "You're a chucker." "No, I'm not. I'm not a chucker." Kramer's like, "Yeah, you're a chucker." George has no self-awareness. And self-awareness is really the enemy of what we're dealing with today in terms of us as personnel people, team builders. Because if the players aren't aware and don't want to be coached and don't know what their weaknesses are and aren't willing to work on them, they have no chance. And Stevens captured that in one word. Oh, it's all about finding players who are self-aware. Holiday's self-aware. Horford's self-aware. Yep. Tatum's, they're all self-aware. So they work on their weaknesses. Whereas no matter how talented you are, Embiid, do you think he's self-aware? He's out of shape. I mean, here's what I don't understand. Your boy, Weedy, what do we call that guy who comes on? Yeah. Brian Windhorst? Yeah, he's bitching about Luka. Hey, bro, why don't you bitch about Embiid being out of shape? You know, why don't you bitch about it? I mean, Luka plays 40 minutes, plays every night. Why don't you bitch about it? You don't bitch about Embiid like that. Like, if you're going to bitch, I don't mind you bitching, but why don't you bitch in a fair way of doing it? So, like, you think he's self-aware? Do you think anybody in the Sixers are self-aware about what they are? Of course not. To me, I think that Stevens is the MVP of the team. I think he was remarkable.
Yeah, and Brad Stevens was named Executive of the Year this year in the NBA, being able to put together this roster, which was really good last year. They were on the doorstep of making the finals, but then he made the trade for Porzingis and Holiday that put him over the top. And you wrote this in the Daily Coach. It says, what does it mean to be self-aware? For Stevens, it means the player understands his weaknesses and is willing to work to improve. In essence, the player is coachable, but more than being coachable, the player doesn't play outside his limits. He knows his range, his strength, and weaknesses, which then allow his contributions toward the team to make a difference. It's like you kind of get in where you fit in with the Boston Celtics, and I think that was what was so remarkable about this team. They didn't have the mega super duper star like a Luka or a Jokic or whatever, but the team, the collective, was the superstar, and they ran through the NBA playoffs, won 80 games this season, which is a really remarkable feat. We'll continue the conversation on the other side. We'll take a quick break. This is the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
You know, Michael, I think one of the biggest pivot points for the Boston Celtics in eventually winning this championship is about, 4 or 5 summers ago, and still Danny Ainge was the general manager. Brad Stevens at the time was the head coach. Oh, yeah. And I was one of the people, I'll raise my hand and say it, I was one of the people saying that they need to cash in on these assets and trade for a Kawhi Leonard or a Paul George or an Anthony Davis, do something to get to that championship level. But they held serve, and they said, well, you know what? We're going to let this thing play out. We're going to keep Jaylen Brown. We're going to keep Tatum. We're going to keep this thing together and let these guys grow. And boy, did they really grow. Jaylen Brown winning Finals MVP on Monday, and Jason Tatum, another first-team All-NBA season and a terrific performance in the closeout game. It's the decision to not trade those guys, I think, was the biggest one in helping this team win the championship.
Well, the decision to have a blueprint, right? I think that's what we're missing. I think so often we just pick and choose. And if you study the Yankee way, if you read that book this summer, which I urge everybody in the NFL to read it, and obviously I didn't write it. I think Andy Martino, he writes for the Daily News, wrote it. It's really a good book into the thought process with a mercurial owner who, can stir. And it's really about Brian Cashman and Gene Michaels. But I think it's a blueprint, right? You need who are we? I always say that all the time. Who are we? And if the great Red Auerbach defined what he wanted in a point guard, now you're going to modify it, you're going to change it, but there should be a conversation in every building, what we want in a center. And if the line coach leaves, what we want in a center shouldn't go with them. It should be what we want, that logo. Rick Rubin has a great podcast. I think her name is Julie Woodard. Keith Cartwright from the Daily Coach community, who's a general manager in the rodeo league, that professional bull riders league. He is part of our community, and he told me to listen to that. I wasn't going to listen to that one because I wasn't sure that she was great. She was tremendous. But what she had a great thing about protect the logo. Like the logo represents, the Packer logo represents what they want in a center. The Packer logo represents what they want in a right tackle. The logo represents what they want. And it's going to modify and change based on the criteria of the team. But you're buying the logo, you're representing the logo. This is what owners don't understand. They keep looking for that, 20-pound weight loss in a week that, you're going to have to build this. And somebody's going to have to define every position like Auerbach did, like Brad Stevens did. Look, think about the Celtics. And I think it's an important conversation to have in terms of team building, whether you're in college or pro, is all the players can switch. They can play switchable defense. So they have all these, so they don't get caught up in a matchups. They have positionless players. I got a requested the other day about, some college coaches are looking for salary cap managers, Like, I think it's kind of a hard job to fill by some young guy who has never put together a roster, but I don't think that's the answer to what they're looking for. The answer to what they're looking for is definition of what they want with their team. If I was running an IL, there would be replaceable players I paid and players I didn't. And I would find them. And whether I was at Alabama, whether I was at the University of Miami, or if I was at North Texas State, okay, this position we can get by with this. This position we need elite. This position we need good. And then those numbers, and that sends a message to you about what you're paying for. If you're at the University of Kentucky and you're running the NIL for their basketball program, you don't need to pay 5 superstars. You need to pay the guys that you feel like contribute to what you want, and the guy that's the position that's the lead dog in what you do, that's who pays. That's who gets the most, assuming he can back it up.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really good lesson. And this is what the GM Shuffle is about. It's like it's lessons in team building and look no further than the Boston Celtics and what they were able to do and accomplishing the 18th banner.
But you have to study teams, Femi. You can't sit there and be so enwrapped into your team like the Giants are. This is what we've done. You got to sit there and really study teams. And it's like you got to be self-aware. And when you're self-aware, if you come in for an interview and I say to you, Femi, give me your strengths and weaknesses. You say, well, I'm strong in this area, but here I'm really shitty in these 10. You won't admit that because you want to get the job. So you won't admit that you're bad at anything. When the way you get the job is to admit what you're bad at. That's how you get the job, right? That's how I want to improve in these 6 areas. If you're someone from the Giants who listen to this podcast and you say, oh, Lombardi just attacks us, he doesn't like us. No. Tell me what I've been wrong and tell me why you think it's personal. Like you should say, okay, here's our weaknesses. What can we do to improve them? But that's a world, that's a different world. It's a completely different world than we live in. And I think, to me, it's the only world to live in.
Yeah. Well, I think people just generally think that if you admit weaknesses, that means you're saying that you're not good enough. When it's like, no, like nobody is perfect. We all have strengths and weaknesses. Like every person on the planet has a strength and a weakness, and we're all works in progress and trying to improve on those weaknesses and also kind of keep supplementing those strengths. But I think people just take it as like, oh, if I admit this, then this means that I'm not up for the task or whatever. And it's just like, hey, you got to look at it from a different lens. And the Boston Celtics were able to go ahead and do that. Let's get back to the quarterback conversation because we obviously broke down the Trevor Lawrence deal earlier this week, but you put up the poll on your Twitter account at @MLombardiNFL. We encourage everyone to participate when Michael puts up these polls, but it was a simple question. Who will be the next quarterback to beat out Trevor Lawrence's contract? Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa were the 3 options, or you could put none of the above and write in a different option. Brock Purdy, Mahomes, Stroud were other popular answers, but Jordan Love was the quarterback who actually won the poll. 38% with Love, 26% with Dak, 21% with Tua, and then 13% at none of the above. Is that how you see it? I mean, to me, it feels like maybe the guy that got 30 or 21% in Tua might be who's up next year.
I think it is. I think Love's the hardest contract to do because Love's contract is based off of what? 8 games, 6 games? Mm-hmm. We would not be having this Love is great conversation based on what he did before the bye. Remember, Love lost to the Giants and Tommy DeVito in New York. Remember that? And then came back and lost at home to Tampa. So, I think he's a hard deal to do. I'm not saying he's not going to get paid. I think he's hard to do if you're Love because I can't pay you. You haven't earned $50 million. Well, Trevor Lawrence hasn't earned $50, but he started longer, so he certainly has. I think the next one to get done is either Tua or Matthew Stafford. I saw yesterday Ian Rappaport reported that Stafford wants a new deal, and everybody in the league knows it. Now, remember, let's go through this timeline a little bit. This time last year, I reported this. Now, they've denied it, but it's true that Stafford was available. And it wasn't available because they didn't like him. He wasn't available because his elbow was bad, and they were unsure to commit the dollars to a bad elbow. It worked out. But now he's got huge contract. Now I think, do they come back and rededicate to the elbow again? I think that's where they're really trapped. This is a hard contract to do because without Stafford, it ain't going to be Stetson Bennett, right? Jimmy Garoppolo misses 2 games, didn't play well, hasn't played well last year. So, where are they going? They're trapped. Do they give it to him? And I think Stafford's serious because Stafford knows he's got him by the ass. And, he's got a chance they have to do something. So I do think there'll be some give and take in this contract. I think they'll move some money around and do some things because if they don't, I think ultimately it's going to cost them. But I think he could be the next. Somebody wrote that one in, and I think they're right.
Yeah, Stafford right now, looking at his 2024 contract, he has a $31 million base salary for the paragraph 5, then $12 million signing proration. The cap hit for the Rams, $49.5 million. Next year, it would be $50.5 million. These are big numbers there, and he's 36 years old. He's no longer a spring chicken, this Matthew Stafford, but I thought last year might have been one of his best seasons ever, if not his actual best, but even better than when they won the Super Bowl.
But he still missed 2 games. Yep. And that elbow is still a problem. He's a tough-ass guy. He's going to play. He's not a big man. He's going to play, and that's why I think you see them. They're going to run the ball. They know what they have to do, and I think they're smart about, look, if we give him this, it's not a question they don't want to do it. It's a question of the lingering effect of it. Because here's the reality of it. If they could easily guarantee us $31 million, right? I mean, that's no big deal. Mm-hmm. Maybe they and then they would lower his cap number and buy more room. But what that does is put more money into the acceleration silo.
Yeah, no, I think it's something to keep an eye on for NFL fans and Rams fans in particular, this Matthew Stafford situation. Couple things before we get out of here. Brandon Aiyuk took to, I guess, TikTok or Instagram or wherever the hell he went, what social media platform that Aiyuk went to. Here's what he had to say when he was, I guess, FaceTiming with Jaden Daniels about his current situation with the Niners and the contract.
What happened, bro? They said they don't want me back. I swear.
He's got a good plate of food, it looks like, sitting on the couch. But he's telling Jaden Daniels, they say that they don't want me back. Is that the case of this thing? I feel like if they didn't want him back, he wouldn't be there.
Here's where I think players have the hardest time understanding. Not wanting the deal you want doesn't mean the team doesn't want you back. Not agreeing to your deal isn't a knock at you. It's a knock at the deal. You got to keep it. It's personal, Sonny. It's strictly business, Sonny, strictly not business. Personal. Yep. Right? Strictly business. They don't want your deal. They don't want to pay what you want. They want you. I'm sure they've offered you. At least I would say you're probably within 70 to 90% range of what you want. And I wouldn't say 90. Let's say 60 to 70% range of what you want. That indicates they want you. They just don't want your number. They just don't want the contract that you want. That's called a negotiation. But, of course, the players run off with, he doesn't want us. He doesn't want us. I mean, look, that's when it's going to push comes to shove, when Jerry has to decide on what to do with Dak. And a lot of this, I think, is being waited on because I think they want to see where they are with Trey Lance. If Trey Lance has any chance of being a good player, Jerry can walk away from $60 million and let somebody else pay it, he might do that.
Yeah, I think if they didn't want you, I don't think they'd be talking to you or having these negotiations. I think that's pretty clear. Like they're not going to negotiate with somebody that they don't want. And I think for Aiyuk, it's probably frustrating. You want to get paid, but such is life. We all sometimes want things that we can't get, and sometimes that's how it goes. Last thing here. Actually, I want to carry this over to the other side because there was some interesting news that came out with the Denver Broncos hiring their former Stanford head coach David Shaw. I just want to get your thoughts on what that means and what he'll be doing in this new role of senior personnel executive. But the comeback player of the year criteria that the NFL, the AP, I mean, I got takes on it, Michael.
Twitter Femi was out.
I got takes
Twitter
on
Femi,
it.
I want to hear it.
I got takes on it.
I want to hear it.
For those who don't know, the NFL switched up the criteria, or they at least tried to clearly define the criteria.
I think
the AP is the one that did that, I should say. Excuse me. The Associated Press did it. We'll break that down on the other side, and also this news from the Denver Broncos hiring Stanford head coach David Shaw. We'll wrap up the conversation next year. This is the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, for those who don't know, the Associated Press, the AP, is in charge of the major NFL awards. Those are the awards that many of the people recognize when they talk about MVPs, Defensive Player of the Years, Rookie of the Years, et cetera, et cetera. And this week, they came out with a, quote, clearly defined criteria now for Comeback Player of the Year in wake of this past season, Joe Flacco winning the award over Damar Hamlin. Here's from the AP. They said, quote, "The spirit of the AP Comeback Player of the Year award is to honor a player who has demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity by overcoming illness, physical injury, or other circumstances that led to him missing playing time the previous season." So that's what they told to the voters, because the voters, I think, after Flacco ended up winning the award, were kind of like, oh, we were a little confused. We didn't know what to vote for, I guess, is how they interpreted. But why I'm a little perturbed by this, Michael, is that why are we trying to encourage people to do something with their vote? I think we could leave it up to the 50. If you trusted these people, 50 of them, to vote on the awards, why can't you leave it up to their own interpretation on what they should actually be voting for? I mean, yeah, I'm sure the way I read this is that the AP was like, why didn't Damar Hamlin win? And there's an argument for him actually winning, but I would tell the AP he probably would have won had you guys not gone to the ranked choice voting, because Damar Hamlin actually had the most first place votes, but I think he was left off enough ballots to where Joe Flacco actually won the award. But my interpretation of this is just that let people go ahead and decide what they want to vote on. Don't tell them what they have to do, or I guess encourage on what they have to do. I think this is just really silly from the AP to go ahead and do this just based on them not liking the result that happened this past February.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you can't, if you're going to have a voting award, you can't orchestrate how the votes is. I mean, you're not Lyndon Johnson in the Hill Country. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, get in your helicopter and start changing votes. But I think, to me, I want clarity on what the vote means. Like, I think that it's their own fault. They should clearly, just like the criteria to get in the Hall of Fame, and I wrote about this in Football Done Right, you should clearly say, okay, the Comeback Player of the Year must have missed 12 to 14 games the year before, had a serious injury, had a serious injury, or didn't play 30% the year before. Something, you make up the criteria. So you're basically outlining who are the candidates. Again, this is no big deal. Scout inside out, not outside in. This is exactly what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. Tell me who I should be looking for comeback. Don't tell me who to vote for. Tell me who fits the criteria. That's all I'm asking you. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's who came back, and then you got to judge based on what they do. Whereas Flacco came back from 2017 off his couch.
Yeah. And why I think, because it seems like to me they want to lean into the direction of either medical illness or medical hardship or injury. And I think that comeback can be defined in many different ways, which is why I think that they should leave it up to the voters here, because Joe Flacco didn't come back from injury, but Flacco, remind people, reached the pinnacle of the sport, was a Super Bowl MVP back in 2012. After that, struggled. The Ravens draft Lamar Jackson. Flacco goes on and kind of bounces around the league, goes to the Jets, goes to other places, and then is on the couch watching Sunday Ticket with the 4 screens with the rest of us. And then he finally gets called, and he saves the Cleveland Browns season.
Not as good as four screen Femi. There's no way.
He can never be that good.
But I love Twitter Femi when he comes out.
He can never be that good.
No, he can never be that good.
Let's
put that out there. Let's make that very clear to people.
He tried.
I don't want anybody taking advantage of my 4-screen Femi. No chance. I can't do it. I know that.
Hey, we're 3 months away, buddy.
I mean, I agree with you. I know. I agree with you. But, I mean, like, at some point you need a definition. Like, what is it? Does Deshaun Watson qualify for the Comeback Player of the Year for next year? How about Russell
Sounds like
Wilson?
He does.
What's he coming back from? A shitty season?
Yeah.
Like, do you think Russell Wilson should be coming back?
No.
Maybe. He got traded. He had a bad year. Threw 7 interceptions. That's all he did. But, I mean, like, I don't know. Like, there needs to be a clear-cut definition. It's just like, okay, you want to be a Hall of Fame coach? Here it is. You want to be a Hall of Fame owner? Here's what you have to do, right? You want to be a Hall of Fame owner. Bob Kraft wants to get in the Hall of Fame more than anything in the world, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he's trying to buy his way in. We know that, all right? Yeah. To me, he should be in the Hall of Fame. He hired a Hall of Fame coach. You're an owner. You hire Arthur Blank just went in the Atlanta Hall of Fame. He put himself in. Why not? Sure, come on in. Kaiser Sosi McKay will be joining you soon. I'm sure Super Bowl winning Fontenot will be coming too. But, I mean, like, what's the criteria to get in? What is it?
Yeah.
You know?
There isn't.
Kaiser Sosi McKay's 169 and 70. Is that a Hall of Fame career as a Falcon executive? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. I don't know. Enjoy. Come on in.
To each their own.
I feel like Bob Barker. Come on down. Yeah.
At our show sponsor, DraftKings, the comeback player of the year of the world, the favorite is Aaron Rodgers at plus 125, Joe Burrow plus 250, Kirk Cousins 5-1, our guy Elliott's quarterback Anthony Richardson, he's at 6-1, Nick Chubb 12-1, Russell Wilson, he was 12-1, now he's 20-1. I think this news of the change of the criteria has kind of softened the Russell Wilson love in the market there to where like
I get that.
he's pretty much going to be
crossed
But
all those guys should be in it.
Yeah.
All those guys should be in it. To me, it's not who should I vote for. It's who's the group I should vote for. That's the most important thing of all.
100%. For the voters, like they should get that information. As somebody who likes to bet on this stuff, I like when the waters are muddy because I think that's where the value comes from because nobody really knows, and that means the odds makers don't know, which can lead to valuable bets. But from a voting standpoint, there should at least be a definition for these people, and I guess there is one. My definition, honestly, Michael, would be to win, you got to be active at least, for any award, you have to be active at least 10 to 11 games. Like we can't be giving awards for people that are active, which would have disqualified Joe Flacco. It would have disqualified DeMar Hamlin last year under my criteria. Right. Like you need to be playing to get some awards. My personal opinion. No shade towards anybody else. Let's get out of here real quick. Before we do, though, the Denver Broncos hired former Stanford head coach David Shaw, and he will now be a senior personal executive. This was reported by Mike Kliss, who covers the Broncos and covered them for quite some time. It said that when Shaw stepped down from Stanford, he expressed a desire to return to the NFL, where he spent nearly a decade as an assistant coach. So now he will be helping out Sean Payton and that Denver Broncos organization. And this is kind of interesting. David Shaw, I mean, we always see him every year in the NFL draft talk about this stuff, but now he's actually tied with a team with the Denver Broncos. I know their relationship goes back to when they were both in Philadelphia in the 90s.
Yeah, I was there when they were both there in Philly when we hired Sean, and David was already there. It'll be interesting. I mean, how this works out. David's always loved personnel. I mean, he goes and did those draft shows, so obviously he knows that. Team building. I think, look, when we talked about Brad Stevens at the beginning of this podcast is, most of the most important thing is you must be able to see players and plays. You must look at a tape, understand schemes, understand what's being asked of the players, and then allow yourself to evaluate. Most of the time, scouts don't do that because there's that fine line of if you get too far into the coaching world, all of a sudden now you want to be a coach, you're second-guessing the coaches. It's a painful existence. I've lived it. It's hurt me more than anything in my career. But the reality of it is if you don't know it, you're just not going to be anybody. That's what Al Davis used to say. If you don't understand it, get the hell out of the building. So I'm sure. And David, one thing about David, one thing I think that we talked about Brad Stevens again to kind of come full circle on this podcast is by hiring, by keeping Missoula and making him and bringing Van Gundy in, he really gave him a truth teller. He gave Missoula a truth teller, which he needed. And David is knowing David as well as I did from the time he was not successful to where he is now as successful. David's always been a truth teller. David's always been strong in his conviction, and so I don't think that's going to alter anything. And I think he'll tell Sean what Sean needs to hear. It was interesting when I listened to the podcast I mentioned with Rick Rubin. I think her name was Julie Woodard, I believe is the name of her. Great. It was a great interview. It really was. It was really good. She was energetic. She was fascinating. But let me just so I make sure I know the name. It's called Tetragrammaton. Yeah, that's the name of it. Julie Greenwald. Julie Greenwald. And so what she made a great point. Rick asked her and said, "What's it like dealing with people who become famous, people who reach stardom, that start with nothing, and then all of a sudden they get famous. And she said, that's a natural evolution. But the harder part is that when someone gets famous, the people around them refuse to tell them the truth. They don't have a truth teller. And that is really the most insightful thing. Because like Van Gundy comes in to help Missoula, he didn't come in there to tell him what he needed what he wanted to hear. He told him what he needed to hear. And that's what you need. That's what most coaches lack. You don't think Robert Saleh needs a truth teller? It ain't Joe Douglas. He needs somebody to help him out. Here's what blows me away, Femi. We talk about this on the Daily Coach community all the time. These guys are making $9-10 million a year. They should hire somebody, David Shaw, somebody who's going to be their truth teller, including the general managers. You become a first-time head coach, you don't know what the fuck you're doing. I don't give a shit how old you are. Belichick would be the first guy to tell you that. When he walked into Cleveland in 1991, he had 14 years experience. He didn't know. He needed help. He needs help. You need a truth teller. And I think ultimately that's what David will be for Sean, because I think all the guys around Sean know Sean so well they don't want to be the truth teller.
Yeah.
And so maybe David will be the truth. I don't think George Payton wants to be a truth teller. George Payton's made too many mistakes in there to have credibility. It's hard to have credibility when you trade all that for Wilson, when you sign Wilson. It's hard. I'm not being mean at George, but it's hard to have credibility. We all make mistakes, but when you make colossal ones, it's hard to have. In this book, this one guy, Clyde, I forget the name of the guy, the coach. He wanted to trade Mariano Rivera for some slappy to play shortstop, because they wanted to send Jeter to the minors. We'll just trade Rivera. We'll get this guy at Seattle. He can fill in while we develop. Oh, brilliant trade. Yeah, I'm glad we listened to you, asshole. Like that, if you would have done that, that could have ruined your career, right?
Yep.
Some of these, you ruin your career when you make a mistake like that.
Yeah, those are colossal. I think the truth-telling, is a really good point because, like you mentioned, a lot of folks who do reach the pinnacle of their profession or get super famous, the people who are closest around them, they want to keep hanging on. They want to keep being around. They don't want to be outcast and removed from the circle. Right. So they oftentimes tell people what they want to hear versus what they actually need to hear. I think that's a really good lesson in any walk of life, for people to realize that for any sort of success. All right, that does it for this edition of the podcast. We're excited. 12 days from now, Michael, we'll get New York Giants off-season Hard Knocks. We'll get some NFL content coming up on July 2nd to go ahead and consume that stuff. But we'll be back.
I tell you what we're going to do with Giant Hard Knocks. We are going to have a running diary of that on the show. I promise you.
I'll be dialed in. Fire up the HBO Max, buddy. We'll be locked in to Big Blue.
Twitter Femi, here we go.
We're not gonna live tweet it. We'll save the takes for the podcast from what we see from the New York Giants Hard Knocks, but I'm sure it'll be an entertaining production nonetheless. But for our producer Elliot Bowman, he's with us on the ones and twos as always. We'll see you guys on Monday. Hope everyone has a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. Michael, I'll talk to you then, man.